All right, welcome to 2-4, subtracting integers. Our last lesson was adding integers, so now we're going to subtract them. Our next lesson is going to be order of operations, where we're going to both add and subtract those integers. So today's objectives is I will be able to subtract integers and I will be able to explain why, I think that's just supposed to say why. That doesn't make sense, the why. Explain why we add the opposite. Okay, we only have one vocab word today, and that is opposite. So if you go to your vocabulary sheets, I'm going to go to opposite. That's what we're looking for, is opposite. So it starts with an O. So that is on page 13. Okay, and we are on opposites. Okay, so opposites are two numbers the same distance from 0. Okay, the two numbers the same distance away from 0. So like -1 and 1 are opposites because they're both 1 away from 0. So if I go 1 to the left, I get to -1. I go 1 to the right, and I get 1. Same thing with -2 and 2. They are opposites. So the opposite of walking forward 3 steps is walking backward 3 steps. Okay, and that is the only vocabulary word for today. So going to our building background. All right, we're going to show on each expression on the number lines. So we have 5 minus 6. Remember, that means we start at 5, and then we go backwards 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because we're taking it away. So we get -1. Okay, now here, if I do 5 plus -6, I start at 5. And I'm going to go to the left 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I get -1. So notice, subtracting 6 and adding a -6 are the same thing. Okay, so today's big idea is right here. So let's star this, or put an arrow next to it. Okay, that's the big difference today. Is the first thing we're going to do is change subtracting to adding the opposite, and then we follow these addition rules, okay, which are the same as yesterday. So if we do positive plus positive or negative plus negative, we're going to add the numbers and the sign stays the same. Or if we do different symbols, we do positive plus a negative or a negative plus a positive, we're going to subtract the numbers and we keep the sign of the bigger number. Okay, so here we go with example 1. It says evaluate the expression. So the first thing we're going to do is change it to adding the opposite. So we keep the 9, and we change the subtracting to adding, and then we want the opposite of 2. So the opposite of a positive 2 is a -2. And this one, I know you could have just done 9 minus 2 right away, but we're just going to see what is the difference. Okay, so are they the same sign or different signs? They are different. So because they are different, we're going to subtract. Okay, and so that's 9 minus 2, which if you need to rewrite it as 9 minus 2, you can. And that's 7. And we add more positives, because really we have 9 positives and 2 negatives. So we're going to keep the positives. So we get 7 is positive. And we really knew that because we could have just done 9 minus 2 in this case, and that's okay in this problem. But number 2, we have -9 minus 2. So this negative means we really have to think about changing it to adding the opposite. So I'm going to take -9, change the subtracting to adding, and the opposite of 2 is -2. So are they the same sign or different signs? They are the same sign. So that means we just add, and then we're going to keep the negative because they're both negative. We have a -9 plus -2. So 9 plus 2 is 11, and then I keep the negative. Okay, backside. We have 3 more examples. Okay, it says evaluate the expression 8 minus -2. So we're going to change it to adding the opposite. So I have 8. I change the subtracting to adding, and the opposite of -2 is +2. So are they the same sign or different sign? And they're the same. So we're going to just add them And then we're going to keep the signs. So currently they're both positive, so we just keep them positive. So 8 plus 2 is 10. Dunsies. Number 4, evaluate the expression -8 minus -2. So now notice the change. This went from a +8 to a -8, so that's what's different on this one. So we're going to change it to adding the opposite. So I keep the -8. I change the subtracting to adding. And then the opposite of -2 is +2. So now the signs are different. So I'm going to subtract. So I have 8 minus 2, and 8 minus 2 is 6. Now I have 8 negatives and 2 positives. So which one do I have more of? I have more negatives. So I'm going to keep the negative. So it'll be -6. Okay, last one, number 5, we're going to evaluate the expression -87 minus -34. So we're going to change it first to adding the opposite. So I keep the -87, I change the subtracting to adding, and the opposite of -34 is a +34. So now they're different signs, so the first thing we're going to do is subtract. And always put the bigger number on top. So the bigger number here is 87, or the greater number, well, kind of, minus 34. So 7 minus 4 is 3. 8 minus 3 is 5. Okay, and I have 34 positives and 87 negatives. So I have more negatives because there's 87 of them. So I'm going to keep this negative. And then that's my answer. Okay, for the summary. When subtracting integers, we change it to adding the opposite. We then follow the addition rules. I was going to say adding rules, but that doesn't really make sense. Addition rules. If they are the same sign, we add the numbers and keep the sign. So if they're both negative, we keep it negative. If they're both positive, we keep it positive. If they're different signs, we subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the bigger number. But it's really not bigger because, like in this case here, -87 isn't bigger than 34, but because there's more negatives, we keep it. And that is it for 2-4.